He died on a Tuesday. I buried him. Then I found his other wife. The Tuesday Elliot died, I made potato soup. I know that sounds like a strange detail to lead with, but grief does something particular to memory. It burns the ordinary things into you with a permanence that the dramatic moments never quite manage. I can tell you exactly what the kitchen smelled like. I can tell you the soup was almost ready, that the potatoes had been in for 20 minutes and needed maybe 5 more. I can tell you the particular quality of the late afternoon light coming through the window above the sink, that specific Georgia October gold that makes everything look more beautiful than it actually is. I remember all of that with complete precision. And I remember the sound of Gloria's voice when she called me. Not the words, the sound. The specific practiced quality of a woman performing the worst moment of her life. I did not know that is what I was hearing. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I was 54 years old. I had been married to Elliot Drummond for 27 years. I had spent more than a quarter century learning the sounds this family made: joy, disappointment, celebration, grief, and I had never once in those 27 years had reason to sort the genuine ones from the performed ones. Gloria Drummond was my mother-in-law. She was 72 years old. She had been widowed when Elliot was 11 and had raised him alone with the particular fierce devotion of a woman who has decided that one person will be the center of her world and has organized everything around that decision. She cried at television commercials. She cried at other people's weddings. She once cried at a particularly moving episode of a cooking show, which Elliot and I had teased her about for years afterward. So when she called me that Tuesday evening, when I heard that voice, that sound, that performed devastation, I did not question it. She told me Elliot had been in an accident on Route 12, that his car had gone off the embankment into the Chattahoochee River, that they had located the car, that Elliot was gone. I turned off the burner under the potato soup. I set the spoon down on the counter beside the stove with the particular careful precision of someone whose brain is processing something too large for the body to absorb all at once. I sat down on the kitchen floor, and I did not get up for a very long time. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from right now. We would love to hear from you. And please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let us get into it. My name is Vivian Drummond. I am 58 years old. I was born in Augusta, Georgia, the second of 3 daughters of a woman who kept every receipt she had ever received in a filing system organized by year and category, and a man who read every contract he ever signed twice before picking up a pen. I did not understand, when I was young, that this was unusual. I thought everyone documented things. I thought everyone kept records. I thought everyone noticed when the numbers did not match and felt a particular restless discomfort until they found out why. I spent 26 years as a hospital administrator in Atlanta. If you do not know what a hospital administrator does, I will tell you the short version. I managed the parts of a large medical institution that kept it functioning, which means I managed chaos for a living. I managed budgets and personnel and compliance and crisis, and the particular special category of problem that arrives without warning and requires an immediate solution that does not exist yet. I am the kind of woman who reads contracts before she signs them. Both pages. All the footnotes. I am the kind of woman who keeps a notebook beside her phone and dates every entry. I am the kind of woman who notices when something is wrong before she can name what the wrong thing is, and who does not talk herself out of that feeling just because she cannot prove it yet. These qualities saved my life. They also, for the better part of 4 years, made me the loneliest woman in any room I walked into, because I was carrying something I could not share, and performing a grief that had quietly become something else entirely, and smiling across dinner tables at a woman who was holding my hand with the same hands she had used to move my money. But I am getting ahead of myself. My children. I need to tell you about my children because this story belongs to them as much as it belongs to me. Cole is my oldest. He is 30 years old. He has his father's build and my father's way of going quiet when he is thinking hard about something. He was working at Elliot's construction company when his father died, and the months that followed, the collapse, the creditors, the forensic accountants, aged him in ways I could see but could not stop. He became, in the year after Elliot's death, the kind of serious that takes a very long time to soften. Naomi is my middle child. She is 27 years old and lives in Charlotte, where she works in healthcare administration. She came to it honestly and calls me every Sunday without exception. Naomi processes privately. She goes inside herself when something is wrong, and she does not come back out until she has built something solid to stand on. I respect that. I have always respected that. It is the quality I find most like myself in her. Eden is my youngest. She was 22 when her father died. She had been his shadow since she could walk. Where Elliot went, Eden went. Where Elliot laughed, Eden laughed. She had his particular way of finding the specific detail in any situation that made it funny, and they had shared that between them the way some parents and children share a private language. When he died, something in Eden went very quiet. Not permanently. Eden is not a quiet person by nature, but for a long time in the way of someone who has lost the person who understood their specific frequency and is not yet sure if anyone else ever will. She was getting married when all of this came apart. I will get to that. I want to tell you about Elliot because the story does not work without him. Not the version of Elliot I discovered, the man who planned and calculated and swam to the other side. But the Elliot I knew for 27 years, because that Elliot was real too, and pretending he wasn't would be its own kind of dishonesty. I met Elliot Drummond at a conference in Savannah in 1994. He was 31 years old, already running the small construction firm he had started at 28, and he was the kind of man who listened when you spoke, not waiting for his turn, actually listening, tracking what you said, and responding to it specifically. In a room full of people performing attention, Elliot's attention felt like the real thing. We were married 14 months after that conference. He was, for the majority of those 27 years, a good husband. I want to be precise about this because I think the temptation, once a person reveals themselves to be capable of what Elliot did, is to rewrite everything that came before as false. To decide that nothing was real. To protect yourself from the grief of losing someone good by insisting they were never good at all. I am not willing to do that. Elliot coached Cole's Little League team for 4 seasons and never missed a game. He drove 3 hours each way to attend every one of Eden's college performances. She was in theater, and he sat in those auditorium seats with a specific focused attention of a man who understood that being present was a form of love. He and Naomi had a Sunday morning tradition of making breakfast together that started when Naomi was 6 and continued until she left for college. Eggs, grits, the works. He taught her to make gravy from scratch. She has never forgotten it. She still makes it the way he taught her. He remembered our anniversary every year without being reminded. He was also, I understand now, a man who had been quietly drowning for longer than he let anyone see. The construction company had been healthy for most of its life. But somewhere in the decade before the river, I have since had accountants reconstruct the timeline, it began to fail in the particular way that businesses fail when the person running them makes decisions that cannot be walked back. Client funds moved into operating accounts. Payroll covered by money that belonged elsewhere. The gap between what existed on paper and what existed in reality growing slowly, steadily, until it reached a size that had a name. Fraud. Not dramatic fraud. Not the kind that makes headlines. The quiet, incremental, desperate kind that starts with one decision that seems temporary and ends with a hole that cannot be filled. Elliot had known for 2 years before the river that there was no filling it. He had 2 choices. Face it, the investigators, the creditors, the criminal exposure, the collapse of everything he had built in front of the people he loved. Or disappear and let the insurance policy handle it. He had taken out a $2.1 million life insurance policy 3 years before the river. I had signed the paperwork. I remembered signing it because I had read it twice before I picked up the pen, the way my father taught me, and I had thought at the time that $2.1 million seemed like a large number, but that Elliot had explained it as standard protection given the company's size, and I had accepted that explanation. I had accepted a great many of Elliot's explanations over the years. He had chosen disappearance. And his mother, the woman who had organized her entire life around being the center of his world, had helped him design every detail of how to do it. I buried an empty casket on a Thursday in October. The river had not returned a body. This happened, the investigators from the county sheriff's department told me, in river accidents depending on current and depth and water temperature. The Chattahoochee ran cold in October, and the current at that section of Route 12 was significant. They told me this with the careful gentleness of people delivering information they have delivered before to people who were not prepared to hear it. I nodded. I thanked them. I went home, and I called my children. The funeral was attended by 200 people. Elliot had been in the community for 30 years, and the community came. His employees came, or the ones who had not yet learned about the company's collapse. His subcontractors came. His Little League families came. People I had not seen in years came and stood in lines and held my hands and said the things people say, and meant them genuinely, which somehow made it harder rather than easier. Gloria stood at the graveside in a black dress and a black hat and wept with her whole body. I stood beside her. I held her hand. She held mine. We were two women at the edge of the same grave, grieving the same man, and every single thing about that moment was a lie, and I would not know it for another 18 months. Cole stood on my other side. His jaw was set and his face was stone, and he did not cry at the graveside, which I knew meant he would cry later and alone, which he did. I heard him through his bedroom door at 2 a.m. 3 days after the funeral, and I sat outside that door in the hallway for 20 minutes before I decided he needed privacy more than he needed me to knock. Naomi held Eden's hand through the whole service. Eden was the one who cried openly, the way she had always felt things, at full volume, without apology. She cried for her father the way you cry when someone was the specific frequency of a person, and that frequency is gone from the world, and you do not know yet how to recalibrate. I watched my children grieve. I held things together. That is what I do. In the weeks after the funeral, the construction company collapsed in the particular slow-motion way of things that have been failing for a long time and are finally allowed to stop pretending. The creditors arrived. The investigators arrived. The forensic accountants arrived and moved through Elliot's records like a slow, careful tide and left behind, when they were done, a picture of what the company had actually been for the last several years, which was not what any of us had believed it to be. Cole managed most of that. I watched my oldest son, 26 years old, fielding calls from creditors and sitting in meetings with investigators and signing documents relating to a business he had worked in and believed in and that his father had hollowed out without telling him. He aged 5 years in 6 months. I watched it happen and I could not stop it, and I am still angry about that. Not at Cole, never at Cole, but at the specific cruelty of a man who could let his son carry that weight while he was alive and watching from Arizona. But I did not know about Arizona yet. The insurance company paid out the $2.1 million 14 months after Elliot's death. I was not extravagant with it. I paid off the house. I put money in accounts for each of the children, not given to them outright, set aside, available when they needed it. I worked with a financial advisor I had used for years and trusted, and invested the remainder carefully and conservatively. And I tried to learn how to be a widow. I was not good at it. Not in the way I expected to be bad at it. Not the grief, not the absence, not the particular specific loneliness of a bed that used to have 2 people in it. Those things were hard in the ways grief is always hard, and I moved through them the way I move through hard things, which is slowly and with documentation, and by staying upright in front of anyone who needs me upright. What I was bad at was the quiet. The specific quiet of a woman whose brain keeps pulling at a thread she cannot find the end of. Something was wrong. I did not know what it was. I could not name it. I could not point to it. I just knew, the way I have always known things before I can prove them, that something in the picture I had been given did not match the picture that actually existed. I wrote that in my notebook. Something is wrong. Find the thread. I did not find it immediately. It found me. In the 18 months after Elliot's death, Gloria Drummond became a slightly different woman. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself. It was cumulative, a series of small things that individually meant nothing and together meant everything. The first thing I noticed was the car. Gloria had driven a 10-year-old Buick for as long as I had known her. She was not a woman who cared about cars. She was not a woman who spent money on things she considered unnecessary, and a newer car had always fallen into that category. 6 months after Elliot's funeral, she was driving a silver Nissan that could not have been more than a year old. I asked her about it casually. She said a friend had given her a good deal. I wrote it in my notebook. The second thing was the house. Gloria's kitchen had the same linoleum floor since 1987. I know this because Elliot had told me once, laughing, that his mother would outlive that floor through sheer stubbornness. 8 months after the funeral, I stopped by her house and the kitchen floor had been replaced with tile. New countertops. New fixtures. A small renovation that could not have cost less than $15,000. I asked. She said she had been saving. I wrote it in my notebook. The third thing was Miami. Gloria mentioned it in a phone call, casually, the way you mention something you have not planned to mention, and immediately wish you hadn't. She was telling me about a restaurant she had been to, and she said, and the fish there reminded me of the place I went to in Miami last spring, and then she moved on without pausing, talking about something else before I had fully registered what she had said. I let her move on. I wrote it in my notebook. A new car. A kitchen renovation. A trip to Miami. I was sending Gloria $1,500 a month. Elliot had been helping her financially for years, and after his death, I had continued without discussion because it felt like the right thing. $1,500 a month did not buy a new car and new countertops and a trip to Miami. Something was wrong. And then there was the phone call I was not supposed to hear. I stopped by Gloria's house on a Wednesday afternoon in March, unannounced, the way I did occasionally, checking on her, making sure she was eating, making sure the woman who had lost her son was managing. I had a key. She had given it to me years ago, and I had used it on her birthday 3 years running to let myself in and leave flowers on the kitchen table before she was awake. I let myself in. I called her name as I came through the door. She was in the kitchen. She did not hear me. She was on the phone, her back to the doorway, one hand on the counter, and the other holding her phone to her ear, and she was speaking in the particular low, concentrated way of someone in a private conversation. I heard 3 words. 3 words before she heard my footstep and turned, and the phone came down from her ear in one smooth practice motion, and the screen went dark. 3 words in Gloria Drummond's voice. A voice I had known for 27 years. A voice I had believed every single time I heard it. He is fine. Present tense. About a man who had been dead for 18 months. She turned and saw me in the doorway and smiled. The warm, specific smile I had seen 1,000 times at 1,000 dinners and holidays, and said, "Vivian, I didn't hear you come in." "Who is that?" I said. "My nephew," she said. "In Birmingham. He has not been well." I smiled back. I stayed for 40 minutes. We had tea. She showed me a photograph of a neighbor's new grandchild. I drove home. I sat in my car in my own driveway for 15 minutes before I went inside. Then I opened my notebook. I wrote the 3 words. He is fine. Present tense. Her son. 18 months dead. He is fine. I sat with those 3 words for a long time. I turned them over. I looked for the explanation that made them innocent. I tried very hard to find it. I could not find it, so I called August. My cousin August is 61 years old. He spent 28 years with the Georgia State Patrol, the last 12 of those years in financial crimes investigation, which is where he learned to follow money the way other people follow roads. He retired 4 years ago to a second career doing private investigation work that he describes as keeping his mind sharp and that I have always suspected is considerably more consuming than that description suggests. August is the person I call when I need something found correctly. Not fast. Correctly. I called him on a Thursday morning. He answered on the first ring. I told him everything. The car. The renovation. Miami. The 3 words. I told him all of it in the order it happened without editorializing, and without asking him what he thought it meant because August thinks better when he is not being steered. When I finished, there was a silence. Then he said, "Vivian, before I say anything else, I need you to do something very specific." I said, "Tell me." He said, "Do not call Gloria. Do not change anything about how you behave around her. Do not let her see anything different in you. Not a look, not a pause. Not a silence that runs half a second longer than normal. Can you do that?" I said, "I managed a 400-bed hospital for 26 years. I have sat across from physicians who were wrong and board members who were lying and regulators who were fishing, and I have not given any of them a single thing they did not earn. I can do this." He said, "I know you can." He said, "Give me 6 weeks." I said, "You have them." He said, "Vivian, I said yes. He said, "Prepare yourself." I did not ask him what I was preparing for. I understood that he already had a shape in his mind of what this was going to turn out to be, and that he was warning me because he cared about me, and because what he was warning me about was large. I closed my notebook. I sat in my kitchen. I prepared myself. 6 weeks later, August came to my house. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I had graded papers and paid bills and helped Eden with college applications and hosted 30 years of Sunday breakfasts. And he opened his laptop and he showed me what 6 weeks of careful, methodical investigation looked like when the person doing it has 28 years of experience and knows exactly which questions to ask and exactly who to ask them to. Elliot Drummond was alive. He was living in Tucson, Arizona, under the name Raymond Calloway. He had been there for 16 months. He had a condominium in a complex near the University District. He drove a dark blue pickup truck registered to Raymond Calloway. He had incorporated a landscaping business, Calloway Land and Grounds, 11 months after his death, using seed capital that August's financial contact had traced through 4 shell transfers to an account opened in Gloria Drummond's name 8 days after the insurance payout. 8 days. She had waited 8 days before she moved the money. August showed me the photographs. Elliot at a hardware store, pushing a cart. Elliot at what appeared to be a neighborhood barbecue, holding a beer, laughing at something someone had said. Elliot in a grocery store parking lot, loading bags into the blue truck. He looked healthy. He looked relaxed in the specific way of a man who has set something very heavy down and walked away from it. I looked at those photographs for a long time. Then I said, he is not alone. It was not a question. Something in the photographs, the body language, the domesticity of the grocery run, a detail I could not name specifically but felt, told me before August confirmed it. August said, no, he is not alone. He showed me the next photograph. A woman. She appeared to be in her mid-40s. She was standing beside Elliot in what looked like a backyard, both of them facing away from the camera, looking at something in the distance. Her name, August told me, was Diane. She was 44 years old. She worked as a physical therapist. She had a teenage son from a previous relationship. She had been with Raymond Calloway, with Elliot for 14 months. She did not know his real name. She believed he was a widower. She believed the landscaping business was built from his own savings. She had no idea. I looked at Diane's photograph for a long time. I thought about a woman who went to work every day and came home to a man she believed she knew and was building something with him she believed was real. I thought about what it was going to do to her when she found out. She needs to know, I said. Before this is over. She needs to know. August said, Vivian, if we contact her before law enforcement. Not yet, I said. I understand the sequence. But she needs to know before it is finished. That is not a request. He nodded. Okay, he said. Here is how we are going to do this. The first thing August did was call a contact at the FBI field office in Atlanta. Insurance fraud at the scale Elliot had committed, $2.1 million, is a federal crime, which means it belongs to federal investigators, which means it carries federal sentencing guidelines, which meant that what Elliot had done carried a weight that a state charge would not have reached. August's contact was a woman named Agent Renee Callahan. She had been with the Bureau for 19 years. August described her as the most precise person he had ever worked with, which from August is the highest possible compliment. He sent her his full documentation package on a Friday night. She called him Saturday morning. She said, this is thorough. This is very thorough. I want to move on this. The second thing was the money trail. A forensic financial specialist that Agent Callahan brought in traced the $400,000 that Gloria had moved from the insurance payout through its 4 shell transfers, each one designed to obscure the trail, each one documented by August's contact, to the account that had funded Elliot's Tucson business. The trail was clear. Not clear to a casual eye. Clear to a trained one. The trail linked Gloria directly to the fraud as a participant, not a bystander. Not a woman who had been deceived by her son. A woman who had opened an account in her own name 8 days after the payout and moved money through 4 shells to fund a new life for a man she had wept for at a funeral she had helped arrange. She had not been deceived. She had been the architect. Agent Callahan confirmed that Gloria Drummond would be included in the federal charges as a co-conspirator. The third thing, and this I requested personally with Agent Callahan in a conversation that I want to describe to you because it matters, was the timing. Eden, my youngest daughter, was getting married in 4 months. She was marrying a man named Theo, who built custom furniture and kept his word and looked at my daughter the way a person looks at something they cannot believe they get to keep. She had spent 2 years after her father's death rebuilding herself piece by careful piece, and she was finally, tentatively, whole in a way she had not been since that October Tuesday. I was not going to let Elliot Drummond destroy her wedding. I sat across from Agent Callahan in her Atlanta office, and I told her this. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "For months." I said, "For months." She said, "I can work with that. I want you to understand what agreeing to that cost me." It meant 4 months of knowing what I knew. 4 months of phone calls with Gloria, warm calls, normal calls, calls where she asked how I was managing and I told her I was getting along, and she made the sounds of a concerned mother-in-law, and I made the sounds of a grateful daughter-in-law. It meant sitting across from Gloria at Eden's engagement dinner 3 months later, watching her cut her food and admire the ring and tell Theo he was getting a remarkable woman, and not allowing a single thing I felt to appear on my face. It meant watching Eden plan her wedding, the dress, the flowers, the venue, the seating chart, and carrying the knowledge of what her father had done and what was about to happen and making the decision, every single day for 4 months, not to take that from her before I had to. Some people have asked me since how I managed it. I managed it the same way I managed everything. I stayed standing. I did not fall apart in front of anyone who needed me upright. And I wrote everything in my notebook. 3 days before Eden's wedding, my daughter called me. Not about the wedding. Not about flowers or seating or the hem of the dress that had needed a last-minute adjustment. She called me because she had received a message. It had come through a social media account with no profile picture, and a username that was a random string of letters and numbers that meant nothing. The message said only, "I heard you are getting married. Congratulations. I am proud of you." Eden had read it to me over the phone in the particular careful voice of someone who does not want to say the thing they're thinking. When she finished, there was a silence. I said, "Eden, I need you to screenshot that message and send it to Cole right now." She said, "Mom." I said, "Please." She said, "You know who sent it." I did not answer that. I said, "Screenshot it and send it to Cole, and then I need you to put it away and focus on your wedding. Can you do that for me?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, ma'am." I called Cole the moment I hung up. He came to my house that evening. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I told him everything. Not a summary. Everything. Every photograph. Every transfer. Every Shell account. The condominium in Tucson. The blue truck. The landscaping business. Diane. Agent Callahan. The 4 months of knowing. Cole did not speak for 5 full minutes. I watched my son's face process it, the same way I had watched it process his father's death, his father's financial crimes, the collapse of the company, the jaw setting, the eyes going somewhere internal, the particular stillness that means he is deciding something. Then he said he sent Eden a message. "Yes," I said. Cole said he has been watching. He knows about the wedding. He has been watching from Arizona, and he sent her a message 3 days before her wedding, and he thinks that is acceptable. I said yes. Cole looked at me. "He is going to come," he said. "You know he is going to come." "I know," I said. "He cannot help himself," Cole said. "He thinks enough time has passed. He thinks you have moved on. He thinks," his jaw tightened. "He thinks he can just walk back in." I said, "I know." Cole said, "Mom, what do we do?" I had been waiting for that question for 4 months. I closed my notebook. I looked at my son. "We let him come," I said. Eden's wedding was on a Saturday in October, exactly 4 years, almost to the week, after the Tuesday Elliot drove his car into the Chattahoochee River. The venue was an event space outside Savannah with Spanish moss on old oaks and string lights and a dance floor that had been set up on the lawn under a tent. Theo waited at the altar with the expression of a man who has been looking forward to this specific moment for so long that the actual arrival of it is almost more than he knows how to hold. It was one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. I sat in the front row. I watched my youngest daughter, who had been her father's shadow, who had grieved for 2 years, who had rebuilt herself with the quiet determination of someone who refuses to let the worst thing that happened to them be the last thing that defines them, walked down that aisle in a dress the color of winter cream, and I felt something I do not have a precise word for. It was not simple joy. It was fiercer than that and more complicated. It was the specific feeling of a woman who has been protecting something for a very long time and is watching it arrive safely. Gloria sat in the second row on the family side. She wore a lavender dress. She wept through the ceremony, the whole body weeping, the heaving shoulders, the reaching for tissues, in the way she had always wept. Completely. Convincingly. I watched her from the corner of my eye. I watched her weep for her granddaughter's wedding while her son watched it from Arizona on a phone he had purchased under a fake name. After the ceremony, after the dinner, after the first dances and the cake cutting and the toasts, I found a quiet moment alone with Eden near the edge of the tent. I held her face in my hands the way I had held it when she was small, and she had needed to be steadied, and I told her she had built something real and beautiful, and that I was prouder of her than I had words for. She looked at me with her father's eyes. She said, "He's here, isn't he?" I looked at my daughter. I said, "Not tonight. Tonight is only yours. Do you understand me?" She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, ma'am." I drove home at midnight. I called August. I said, "Tomorrow." He said, "Callahan's team is already in position." I said, "Good." I said, "August." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Make sure it is public. Make sure there are witnesses." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Vivian." I said, "Yes." He said, "It already is." Elliot Drummond, Raymond Calloway, walked into his daughter's wedding reception at 7:43 p.m. I know the exact time because Agent Callahan's team had been positioned outside the venue since 5:30. I had given them the location 3 months earlier. I had given them the guest list. I had given them the photograph of the blue truck. He did not drive the blue truck. He had rented a car. A silver sedan that Agent Callahan's team logged entering the venue parking lot at 7:38, and that Elliot, not Raymond, not David, not any of the names he had tried on, stepped out of at 7:41 in a suit I had never seen. He walked in through the main doors during the dancing. He had not been invited. He had not told anyone he was coming. He stood at the entrance of the tent, and he looked at the room, at the string lights and the dancing and the tables and the people he had known for most of his adult life, people who believed he was dead, people who had stood at his funeral and held his wife's hands and said things they meant. And something moved across his face that I can only describe as the expression of a man who has been hungry for a very long time and has just walked into a room full of everything he gave up. He did not see me immediately. He saw Eden first. She was dancing with Theo, laughing at something Theo had said, her cream dress moving. He watched her for about 10 seconds with an expression that, had I not known what I knew, I might have called love. I know what it actually was. It was appetite. The need to be seen by the people whose seeing matters to you, even when you forfeited the right to it. The particular hunger of a man who has been invisible for 2 years and can no longer stand it. He saw Cole next. Cole was standing at the bar on the far side of the tent. He had been standing there for 2 hours. He had positioned himself there specifically because it gave him a sight line to the entrance. When Elliot walked through the door, Cole went completely still in the way of someone who has been told a thing is coming and has prepared for it, and is now discovering that no preparation is actually adequate. Cole did not move. He looked at his father across the length of that tent, and his face did something I will not describe because it belongs to him. Elliot's eyes moved across the room. He found me. I was standing at the edge of the dance floor. I was wearing a deep green dress that I had bought for this specific evening because I had known for 4 months that this evening was coming, and I had decided that when it did I was going to be standing in it correctly. We looked at each other across a room full of people who did not yet understand what they were witnessing. He took 1 step toward me. His face held something, an opening, a beginning of something, maybe an explanation he had been rehearsing for 2 years, maybe an apology, maybe just the sound of a name. Agent Renee Callahan walked through the entrance door. The room took a moment to understand what it was seeing. This always happens. People do not expect arrests at wedding receptions. The mind searches for an explanation that fits before it accepts the one that doesn't. A fire marshal. A venue issue. A misunderstanding of some kind. Agent Callahan and two additional agents cross the reception floor with the efficient, unhurried precision of people who have covered the exits and have nowhere to be except exactly where they are. Elliot turned. He saw them. And in that specific, unguarded moment, in the half-second before a person reaches for composure, I saw his face do something it had never done in 27 years of marriage. It broke open. Not into tears. Not into protest or denial or any of the performances I might have expected. Into something more final than any of those. The expression of a man who has been running for 2 years and has just felt, in one specific instant, the exact moment when the road ends. He did not run. He did not argue. He stood in his rented suit in his daughter's wedding tent, and he let Agent Callahan approach him, and he listened as she stated his name. His real name, Elliot James Drummond, every syllable of the name on the marriage certificate, on the insurance policy, on 3 children's birth certificates, and the charges. Insurance fraud.
Wire fraud.
Identity fraud. Conspiracy. On the word conspiracy, a second agent moved through the tent toward the family tables. Toward Gloria, who was sitting with a glass of champagne in her lavender dress, watching her son be handcuffed 22 feet away from her. I am told the champagne glass tipped when the agent reached her. I did not see it. I was watching my children. Cole had not moved from the bar. His drink was in his hand and his face was stone, and he did not look at his father once. Not once. During the entire arrest, through the handcuffs and the reading of charges and the walk across the tent floor, Cole looked at the bar. Naomi, who had flown in from Charlotte, had her husband's hand held in both of hers. She was looking at the table in front of her in the precise way of someone who has made a decision about what they will and will not witness. Eden had stopped dancing. She was standing in the center of the dance floor in her cream dress, her flowers still in her hand, Theo beside her with his hand on her back. She was watching her father be arrested on her wedding day. I watched my youngest daughter's face travel through every stage of understanding in the space of about 40 seconds. Confusion, the same confusion the whole room was feeling. Then recognition, faster than the room, because she had known since Thursday that this was possible. Then something that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but lived in the complicated territory between them, the place where you put things that are too large for any single emotion to contain. Then Theo pulled her gently closer. And she let him. That was the moment I exhaled. Not when the handcuffs went on. Not when Agent Callahan stated the charges. When Theo pulled Eden closer, and she let him. When I saw that my youngest child, who had been her father's shadow for her whole life, had built something sturdy enough to hold her when the shadow turned out to be something else entirely. That was when I knew it was over. I had promised August that Diane would know before this was finished. Agent Callahan's team contacted Diane in Tucson the same evening. She was told that the man she knew as Raymond Calloway was Elliot Drummond, that he was legally married, that he had faked his death to collect on an insurance policy, that the $400,000 used to establish the landscaping business had come from his wife's insurance payout, that his wife had been a widow for 4 years and had not known he was alive. August told me later that Diane had been very quiet during the call. Then she asked one question. Does his wife know about me? The agent said yes. Diane said, what did she do when she found out? The agent said, she waited 4 months so her daughter's wedding would not be destroyed. Then she let the law handle it. There was a long silence on the line. Then Diane said, tell her I am sorry. I received that message from August the following morning. I sat with it for a long time, at the kitchen table, with my notebook closed, with the coffee getting cold, and I thought about a woman in Tucson who had loved someone she thought she knew and had been building a life on a foundation that had been rotten from the first day she set foot on it through no fault of her own. I wrote Diane a letter. Not a long one. Not an angry one. I told her that Elliot had spent 27 years practicing on someone far closer to him than she was, and that what had happened to her was not something she could have seen coming. I told her I hoped she and her son were going to be all right. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I meant every word. I never received a reply. I did not expect one. Some letters are not written to receive answers. They are written because the truth deserves to be said out loud to the person it most directly concerns, and because the alternative, letting Diane wonder what Elliot's wife thought of her, what kind of woman she believed Diane to be, felt like one cruelty too many in a story that had already had enough of them. The federal trial lasted 8 months. Federal proceedings are methodical in a way that suits me. They move through evidence the way I move through problems, systematically, without shortcuts, with a respect for documentation that I find professionally familiar. I attended every session I could manage. I sat in the gallery with my notebook, and I was there when the evidence went in, and I was there when the witnesses testified, and I was there for every day of closing arguments. Elliot's defense was expensive and thorough and ultimately ran out of room. The first argument was financial duress, that Elliot's actions had been committed under conditions of extreme psychological stress and should be understood as a crisis rather than a calculated crime. The prosecution's forensic accountant testified for 2 full days and dismantled this with the specific patience of someone who has 30 years of experience explaining to juries why planning looks different from panic. The transfers. The shell accounts. The insurance policy taken out 3 years prior. The fake identity prepared in advance. None of that is panic. All of that is planning. The second argument was that Gloria had acted independently, that she had moved the money without Elliot's direction or knowledge. This collapsed when Agent Callahan's team presented the phone records. 41 calls between Elliot's Tucson number and Gloria's cell phone in the 14 months after his disappearance. 11 of those calls in the 4 days surrounding the insurance payout. The records did not say, in plain language, move the money now. They did not need to say it in plain language to mean it. The third argument was the one that told me more about Elliot than anything else in the trial. His defense attorney stood before the jury and argued that Elliot's appearance at Eden's wedding demonstrated remorse. That a father who had traveled across the country to see his daughter get married, who had risked exposure to be present for that moment, was a man whose capacity for rehabilitation deserved consideration. The prosecution's response was measured and precise. Elliot had not told Eden he was coming. He had not contacted his wife. He had not turned himself into law enforcement. He had sent an anonymous message to his daughter. Not to confess, not to prepare her, not to give her the choice of whether she wanted him there, and then he had arrived uninvited in a room full of people who believed he was dead and stood at the entrance, watching his daughter dance. That was not remorse. That was a man who needed so badly to be seen that he was willing to walk into the one room most likely to destroy everything he had built in Arizona, not for Eden's sake, but because 2 years of invisibility had become unbearable. He had not gone to that wedding for his daughter. He had gone for himself. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Guilty on all federal counts. Elliot Drummond was sentenced to 14 years. He will serve a minimum of 11 given federal sentencing guidelines. Gloria Drummond was convicted on 2 counts of conspiracy and 1 count of wire fraud. For years, with the possibility of serving 2 with good behavior. The $400,000 was ordered returned in full through civil judgment. It has been returned. It is mine. When the verdict was read, I was sitting in the gallery with my notebook closed on my knee. I had closed it when the jury filed back in because I knew, watching their faces as they entered, what the verdict was going to be, and I decided that some moments do not need to be documented. Some moments just need to be witnessed. I did not feel triumph. I felt something I have thought about many times since, and still do not have a single word for. The closest I can get is this. It felt like a room that had been cold for a very long time finally, quietly closing. Cole has not visited his father in prison. He told me this over coffee at my kitchen table, 6 weeks after sentencing, in the direct, uncomplicated way he handles most things. I have nothing to say to him right now, he said. Maybe someday. I don't know. I told him that was entirely his. I meant it without qualification. Naomi wrote Elliot a letter. She told me she had written it and sent it and that the contents were private, and I told her I respected that completely. Naomi has always known what she needs, and I have always trusted her to know it. Eden is the one I watch with the most care. Not because she is fragile, I want to be clear about this, but because what Elliot did to her specifically occupies a category of cruelty that I find distinct from what he did to me or to Cole or to Naomi. He let his youngest child, the one who was a shadow, believe she had lost him. He watched her grieve from a distance. He watched her rebuild herself. He watched her fall in love and plan a wedding. And then 3 days before that wedding, he sent her a message, not to give her the truth, but to make sure she knew he had been watching. That is not a man in crisis. That is a man who could not bear being invisible to the people whose seeing mattered most to him, even at the cost of everything. Eden told me something 6 months after the trial that I have returned to many times. She said, "The man I lost when I was 22, the man I cried for, the man whose funeral I stood at, that was my father. That man is gone. He died the day he drove into that river. Whoever came to my wedding was someone I don't have a name for yet." I looked at my daughter. I thought about the specific hard-won precision of a person who has decided, out of self-preservation and out of clarity and out of the long work of understanding, exactly what is true. "Yes," I said. "That is exactly right. Theo, her husband, is a good man. He held her through the reception, and he holds her still, and I watch the way he pays attention to her, and I think about what Elliot said about Eden's attention being like a private language, and I think Theo has learned that language. I am grateful for that beyond my ability to express it. People ask me about Gloria. It is the question I am asked most often, actually, by people who know the story. Not about Elliot. Elliot's betrayal, enormous as it was, follows a kind of logic that people can trace even when they cannot accept it. A man drowning. A man who chose escape. The logic does not excuse anything, but it can be followed. Gloria is the one people cannot follow. She was my mother-in-law for 27 years. She sat in the second row at my wedding. She was in the delivery room when Cole was born. I had wanted her there, and she had been exactly what I needed. She taught Naomi to make pie crust on a Sunday afternoon when Naomi was 8 years old, and Naomi still makes it the same way. She sat with Eden for 3 days after a painful breakup when Eden was 19 and held her and let her talk, and Eden has never forgotten it. She was, by every measure visible to me across those 27 years, genuinely present and genuinely warm and genuinely part of this family. She was also the woman who stood at an empty casket and wept while she knew her son was in Tucson. She moved $400,000 8 days after the payout. She looked me in the eye and said, "Nephew," when I heard her say, "He is fine." She held my hand at the graveside. I have thought about Gloria more than I have thought about Elliot, which surprises people when I tell them. They assume it would be the other way. But Elliot's betrayal, once I understood it, has a shape I can hold. I can put it down and pick it back up, and it is the same shape every time. Gloria's does not have a shape I can hold. She chose her son. I understand choosing your child. I would choose my children. I would do almost anything for my children. But she chose him over the grief of his own children. She sat across from Cole at holiday dinners while Cole was aging 5 years in 6 months, managing the collapse of his father's company. She called Naomi every few weeks to check on her while Naomi was processing privately and rebuilding slowly. She was present for every stage of Eden's broken healing. She chose him, and she did all of that simultaneously. She held my hand at the graveside, and that same week, she moved my money. I do not have a word for it. I have looked for one. It is not in any language I know. 14 years. Elliot Drummond will be 70 years old when he is released at the minimum. The landscaping business is dissolved. The Tucson condominium was liquidated as part of asset recovery. The $400,000 has been returned. The $2.1 million is mine, legally, permanently, without contest. The second family he thought he was building, gone before it finished forming. The freedom he swam toward, gone. The children he planned to return to on his own schedule when he decided the timing was right, not gone but changed. Irrevocably, permanently changed in ways he put in them without their permission. Making their own decisions on their own timelines about what if anything remains between them and the man who let them grieve. He lost all 3. Not because I engineered those losses. Because he could not stand being invisible for 2 years. Because arrogance told him enough time had passed and that the people he left would simply receive him. Because he walked into a tent full of string lights and a daughter in a cream dress and people who believed he was dead, and he needed so badly to be seen that he could not make himself wait one more day. He destroyed himself. I stayed standing. That is the entire story. August came for Thanksgiving. He ate more than any retired investigator has a right to eat and talked about his garden with the focused enthusiasm of someone who has transferred 30 years of professional intensity into tomatoes and is not embarrassed about it. After dinner, after Eden and Theo had driven back to their apartment and Naomi had called from Charlotte and Cole had fallen asleep on the couch in the way he has been falling asleep on that couch since he was a small boy, August and I sat on the back porch with decaf coffee and the particular quiet of two people who have been through something together that resists ordinary description. He said, "You held it together for 4 months." I said, "I had no choice." He said, "You had a choice." I said, "August." He said, "You could have fallen apart. People would have understood. Nobody would have blamed you." I said, "My children needed me standing." He nodded. He looked at his coffee. Then he said, "What was the hardest part?" I thought about that. "The potato soup," I said. He looked at me. I said, "The night Celestine, the night Gloria called me." I turned off the soup. I never finished it. And for 4 years, I could not make it again. Every time I tried, I would get to the same point in the process, and I would have to stop and put everything away. He was very quiet. I said, "I made it last week." He said, "Yeah?" I said, "I made it, and I finished it, and I sat down and I ate it at the kitchen table by myself." He said, "How was it?" I sat with that question for a moment. "Just soup," I said. It was exactly what it always was. Just potato soup. Nothing more than that. August looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly, the way he nods when something has been confirmed that he already suspected. "That is it," he said quietly. "That is the whole thing right there. Maybe it is. Maybe that is what the end of something this large actually feels like, not a verdict being read, not handcuffs, not 14 years pronounced in a federal courtroom. Maybe it is smaller than all of that. Maybe it is a Tuesday evening in your own kitchen, for years later, turning the burner back on, finishing what you started, sitting down, eating the soup. Elliot Drummond is serving his federal sentence. Gloria Drummond is serving hers. The house is mine. The money is mine. My children are healing, each one in their own way, on their own schedule, on ground that belongs to them. Diane is doing well. August keeps track of these things. And every Sunday morning, nobody asked me to, nobody expected it, I make breakfast. Eggs. Grits. The works. Because some things deserve to continue. Because ordinary life on the other side of something like this is not a consolation prize. It is the whole point. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you that patience and documentation and the refusal to fall apart in front of the people who need you standing are their own form of power, please share it. Someone out there needs to hear that the truth has a way of walking back into the room. And when it does, you want to be standing there, dressed and ready. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. Subscribe for a new story every week. We are not finished yet. Until next time, stay standing.